You know, that feeling, that really rock-solid, undeniable sense of I, of me,
Hmm.
existing distinctly. Well, in a world that feels equally solid and external, it's such a foundational part of our human experience, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It feels like bedrock reality.
But what if that feeling, that deep-seated perception of yourself and everything around you, what if it isn't quite what it seems?
It's a huge question, and one that certain ancient wisdom traditions have really grappled with for centuries. And what's so fascinating about the insights we're looking at today is how directly they challenge those fundamental assumptions we all just carry around.
Absolutely. So today we're taking a deep dive into some profound ancient wisdom drawn from specific Buddhist texts and commentaries. And our mission really is to unpack a central concept,
Mm.
the meditation on the absence of self and also the absence of independent existence for all phenomena.
Yeah, it's about exploring why this idea is considered so crucial, what it actually means, and maybe how someone might even begin to approach such a, well, radical shift in perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to say, this isn't just some abstract philosophical game.
Not at all. The sources we're drawing from present this understanding as a direct path, a path towards liberation from suffering, offering a fundamental shift in how you perceive yourself and the entire world around you.
A profound internal change, potentially.
Yeah, for anyone willing to really look closely at their own experience.
Okay, so let's start right there. It seems, well, pretty counterintuitive to question something as basic as our own sense of self or the reality of the world. Why would these traditions even begin there? What's the motivation for this kind of deep inquiry?
That's a really key question. The texts actually pinpoint our common human tendency as the root of the problem. They say we're driven by ignorance and unwillingness to seriously analyze the surrounding phenomena.
Ignorance. Oh, but is that like a deliberate choice?
Not necessarily deliberate, no. It's framed more as an automatic, almost ingrained habit of the mind. It leads us to just spontaneously create these conceptual constructs like I, mine, subject and object, self versus others.
So it's not a choice, but more like a cognitive default, an unconscious habit of labeling everything.
Precisely, yeah, a default setting. And this automatic construction, this habit, it actually prevents us from recognizing the insubstantiality of our own self and external objects.
Insubstantiality, meaning not solid, not real in the way we think.
Exactly. Chandrakirti, who's a major figure in these traditions, he explains that we're generally convinced that all phenomena possess self-nature, exist themselves, and their existence does not depend on anything else.
Right, like this microphone exists completely on its own, independent of me or the table or anything else.
That's the feeling, yes. So understanding the absence of independent existence means realizing that this mental construct, this deep belief that things exist inherently by themselves, separate from everything else, isn't actually reflecting reality.
Wow, okay. That's a huge claim. It implies there's a fundamental misunderstanding baked into how we perceive everything. And I understand this absence of independent existence has sort of two main sides to it.
That's right. It applies to two primary areas, which are deeply connected. First, the absence of independent existence of one's own self in individuals, so looking inward. And second, the absence of independent existence in external objects, looking outward.
Okay, the me inside and the world out there.
Mm-hmm. They form a unified view, really.
And this brings us right to the heart of why this matters so much in these traditions.
Yeah.
Suffering. How does this mistaken belief in an independent self and independently existing things, how does that actually lead to suffering?
Well, Dharmakirti, another really important philosopher here, he points out something crucial. He says, the representation of the independent existence of one's own self arises from the belief that there is something we call self, and it is unchanging, permanent, and immutable.
That core feeling of a continuous, unchanging me.
Exactly. And this mistaken idea, this conviction in a constant physical body and, an unchanging material world,
Yeah.
that, he says, generates all our defilements and obscurations.
Defilements and obscurations, meaning
Meaning basically all the mental afflictions, the negative emotions, the confusion, the things that cloud our minds and ultimately bind us to suffering.
so it's that very idea of a solid, permanent me inside a solid, permanent world that causes all the trouble. It's the clinging to this imagined stability.
In essence, yes, that's the argument. This idea of an independently existing self is often seen as the sort of internal controller or consciousness that clings to our psychophysical components that they call the skandhas.
Oh, the skandhas. Those
Yeah.
are the 5 components, right? Form, feeling, perception.
That's them. Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. They're constantly changing moment to moment, but we tend to cling to them as if they form some kind of stable, permanent substance, like a core me.
And we do the same with external things.
We do. The mind incorrectly attributes that same kind of independent existence, that solidity, to external objects, too. It's like our mind is constantly building and reinforcing these, well, mental castles of permanence and independence that aren't really there.
And these mental castles, these two forms of mistaken perception, clinging to an independent self and independent phenomena, that's what's said to lead directly to karma, mental obscurations, emotional defilements, and suffering. It sounds like a profound chain reaction.
It really is presented that way, tracing suffering right back to this fundamental misunderstanding. Sri Dharmakirti gives a pretty stark warning about it. He said something like, the idea of one's own self always generates the idea of something other.
Right. Me versus not me.
If we cling to these ideas, attachment and aversion will arise. And if we surrender to these two poisons, the mind will immediately be filled with many defilements.
Wow. So the moment we establish that solid self, we automatically create another. And from that fundamental split, that duality, springs the whole roller coaster of attachment, wanting things, and aversion, pushing things away. And that contaminates everything.
That's the analysis, yes.
Okay, so this is where it gets practical. If this mistaken perception is the root cause, how does deeply understanding its absence actually disrupt that whole cycle of suffering? How does knowing there's no independent self help?
Well, the Precious Garland of Ornaments, another text, explains it this way. By fixating on the skandhas, we give birth to the idea of our own self and then create ever new karma, allowing the mind to believe in this idea.
So fixation leads to the self idea, which leads to actions, karma, which reinforces the belief, a cycle.
Exactly. And if we don't interrupt that process, the texts say, we can never break free from the cycle of rebirth, or samsara, that endless loop of suffering and conditioned existence driven by this ignorance and clinging. That's why they emphasize that it is very important to constantly reflect on the absence of self-nature, because otherwise we will not be able to achieve liberation.
Constant reflection. It sounds like a fundamental intervention, not just a quick fix. The introduction to Madhyamaka even states, all our delusions and defilements arise from the mistaken idea of self. A yogi who has understood that the idea of self is illusory is capable of getting rid of misunderstanding.
And just to clarify for listeners, a yogi here doesn't necessarily mean someone doing complex physical postures, but rather someone seriously engaged in this kind of spiritual practice and deep meditation.
Right. So understanding the illusion is the key to getting rid of the misunderstanding that fuels suffering. It's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. The transformative power is said to lie in meditating on this absence of self, which can literally change the direction of mental processes, steer them away from that habitual fixation on the skandhas.
Rerouting the mind's default pathways.
Exactly. And this offers a chance to stop wandering in samsara wanderings that are conditioned by attachment and clinging. It's about moving beyond those automatic mental habits that keep us stuck.
Okay, we've laid out a really compelling why behind challenging these fundamental perceptions. Now, let's shift gears a bit and turn to the how. How does one actually begin to meditate on this profound absence of an independent self? What does that look like in practice?
Right. So this first aspect of the meditation focuses squarely on refuting the independent existence of the individual self. And the assertion right out of the gate is pretty bold. Such a concept as an independently existing self simply does not exist.
It doesn't exist. Not that we need to destroy it, but that it was never there to begin with.
That's the core idea. It's about realizing its inherent absence, not eliminating something real.
That's a challenging idea for most of us, I think, given how real the meat feels.
Yeah.
How do these traditions go about substantiating that claim? How do they demonstrate this absence?
They use rigorous analysis. One key tool comes from the Madhyamaka school, which is a major school of Mahayana Buddhist philosophy focused on emptiness, and it's often called the fourfold reasoning.
The fourfold reasoning, okay.
The logic goes something like this. If an independent, truly existing self were real, it would have to come into existence in one of four ways. But the argument goes, all four are logically impossible.
And those four ways are?
It would have to arise either 1, from itself, 2, from something outside itself and other, 3, from both itself and something outside itself, or 4, from neither, meaning completely without any cause.
Okay, from itself, from other, from both, or from no cause.
Right. And the analysis aims to show why none of these can possibly hold true for an independently existing self.
So trying to pin down how this independent self originates logically reveals that, well, it can't.
That's the conclusion. As the precious garland of ornaments puts it, the self cannot arise from itself, from outside, from both. And in the three times past, present, future, there's no place where it could abide. Therefore, we should not rely on this mistaken representation.
So the inability to find it through logic is the insight.
Exactly. Its very unfindability under analysis reveals it as a construct, a concept, not some fixed independent thing we usually assume it to be.
Okay. And what about its relationship to the skandhas, those five components, like form, feeling, perception we mentioned? How does the analysis look at the self in relation to those?
Good question. The texts analyze that relationship closely too. One line of reasoning asks, what if the self is actually identical to the skandhas?
Like I'm, my thoughts, my body, my feelings, all bundled together.
Right. But if that were true, the texts argue, if the skandhas are the self, then it too must experience birth and death, just like the skandhas, which are constantly changing, arising and ceasing.
So the self wouldn't be permanent, it would be flickering in and out of existence moment by moment.
Precisely. And that leads to contradictions, doesn't it? Like difficulties with memory, how could you remember yesterday if you today is totally different? Or accountability for past actions, who is responsible if the self changes constantly?
Yeah, that unravels our whole sense of continuity. Okay,
Yeah.
so the self can't be identical to the skandhas. What's the alternative they examine?
The alternative is, what if the self is absolutely distinct from the skandhas? Completely separate, independent from the body and mind components.
Like a little soul or controller sitting apart from experience.
Sort of. But then the argument found in texts like the fundamental verses on the middle way is, if the self were something separate from the skandhas, it would have no defining characteristics, and it would then be simply nothing.
Meaning, if it's totally separate from form, feeling, perception, etc., what qualities could it possibly have? How could we even know it?
Exactly. Without any characteristics drawn from experience, which are the skandhas, it becomes meaningless, utterly impossible to perceive. So it's either identical and impermanent, which causes logical problems, or it's distinct and has no characteristics, making it imperceptible and essentially nothing.
It feels like a very tight logical net. Thorough. And this dismantling of the independent self that also directly impacts the idea of an independent other, right? It connects back to that core duality.
Absolutely critical point. As the introduction to Madhyamaka urges, we should realize without delay that which is called other is just as insubstantial as that which is called self.
Because if there's no fundamentally real self,
Yeah.
then how can there be a fundamentally real other defined in opposition to it? It makes no sense. The fundamental verses asks pointedly, where there is no substantial self, how can a substantial other exist? The two concepts are completely interdependent.
That realization sounds incredibly freeing. It implies, as the texts say, when we understand that a substantial self does not exist, we understand that our actions also do not possess independent existence. They're not performed by a solid self.
Right, and this realization is what's said to lead the yogi to freedom. It dismantles the very foundation upon which suffering, based on self-other distinctions, is built.
It suggests the whole premise is flawed from the start. It does. The stages of meditation text note something interesting here. It says, the idea of an independently existing self relies on the 5 skandhas, 12 sources of perception, 18 constituents of sensory perception, and so on. Without them, no idea of one's own self would arise.
So the self idea needs these changing components to even appear.
Yes. And while some non-Buddhist views might see the self as unchanging, the actual building blocks, the skandhas, are composite and constantly changing. This highlights the false premises underlying the whole notion of a permanent, independent self.
It's a powerful point. If the bricks are always changing, how can the house built from them be permanent or exist on its own?
Okay, so to recap that part. Through this rigorous analysis, the individual self is kind of dissected and shown to be unfindable as a solid, independent entity. It's revealed as a construct. Now, let's broaden the lens. What about the second aspect, the absence of independent existence and external phenomena? This is about deconstructing reality out there, isn't it? Yes, exactly. It's applying that same sharp, analytical lens to everything we perceive as the external world. And the conclusion is similar. Just like the self, our perception of the independent existence of external phenomena is also fundamentally based on delusion.
So our minds are attributing a solidity and independence to, say, this table or that tree outside that isn't inherently there.
That's the idea. Think of something like a wave in the ocean. A wave clearly exists, we see it, but does it have an independent waviness all by itself?
Hmm. No, it depends entirely on the water, the wind, gravity, the seabed, perhaps.
Precisely. It's entirely dependent on conditions. It has no inherent independent existence apart from those conditions. The argument is that all phenomena, including the seemingly solid objects around us, operate similarly. They arise dependently.
So do we apply that same fourfold reasoning to external objects as well? What does that show?
We do. The fundamental verses on the middle way applies it broadly to phenomena, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, but also without cause, nothing arises into existence.
The same four impossibilities.
Yes. The texts argue against things arising from themselves, because cause and effect would then be identical. A thing would have to exist before it existed, which is illogical. It can't arise from another in an independent way, because then cause and effect would be totally unrelated, making any connection arbitrary.
Like a table suddenly popping out of a cloud for no reason.
Right. Asserting both arising from self and other just inherits the contradictions of both positions, and arising without any cause. Well, that just means it can't be considered real or understandable in any meaningful way.
That's a pretty powerful logical framework against inherent existence. So this analytical investigation leads to the conclusion that neither subject nor object possesses substantiality in independent existence.
That's the profound outcome. The division we make between a solid, me, subject looking at a solid world object breaks down under analysis. Dharmakirti states, by analyzing the phenomena of the external world, we understand that they are insubstantial. In reality, they possess neither a single nor a manifold nature.
Not single, not multiple, meaning they can't be pinned down as definitively one thing or many separate things.
Exactly. Even what we might consider the most basic building blocks, like atoms, are described in some texts as not truly indivisible or independently existing, because they themselves consist of smaller particles. The analysis goes all the way down. There's no ultimate, solid unit of reality to grasp onto anywhere.
Okay, this is where my mind starts to bend a little. If external objects aren't independently real, if even atoms aren't truly solid in that ultimate sense, then what is creating this incredibly convincing illusion of a solid, independent reality that we experience every single day? Where does it come from?
That's the crucial insight, the linchpin connecting it all back. The texts state, mistaken ideas of self and external world arise due to karmic traces and tendencies, which are born from defiled thinking.
Karmic traces, like imprints from past actions and thoughts. And defiled thinking, meaning thinking clouded by ignorance, attachment, aversion.
Precisely. The explanation of Bodhicitta puts it very directly. Nothing in the external world exists by itself, independently of the mind.
Independently of the mind. So our own minds, conditioned by our past karma, our habits of thinking, they are projecting this seemingly solid world. That sounds almost like a magic trick on a cosmic scale.
And that is exactly the analogy used. Texts like the Lankavatara Sutra and the Sutra of the King of Meditative Equilibrium compare it to a magician creating illusory forms, chariots, horses, elephants that seem totally real to the audience but aren't actually there independently.
Wow.
Similarly, they say, our perception of the world creates certainty, substantiality, and time, even though the underlying reality lacks that independent existence. Our mind, obscured by hidden defilements, creates the manifestation of the external world. However, no such reality exists.
That is truly mind-bending. The idea that the seemingly solid reality out there isn't just passively perceived, but is profoundly co-created or projected by our own conditioned minds. That's a powerful lens to view your daily life through.
It really is.
It makes me think of those moments, when you're absolutely convinced you saw something out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn, there's nothing there. It's like our mind can create convincing appearances. Maybe this is that, but on a much grander, more constant scale.
That's a good way to think about it. The Stages of Meditation text really drives this home. It says that even if some phenomenon looks as if it is reliable, constant, and existing in time, should we analyze it by breaking it down into smaller components, it will immediately become clear that it is devoid of substantiality.
So analysis pierces the illusion of solidity.
Yes. And it likens our inner, long-established tendency to cling to phenomena, which are essentially insubstantial, to taking what happens in a dream for pure truth. We know dreams aren't real when we wake up, right?
Right.
But during our waking hours, the text suggests, we evaluate as real and unchanging what is actually ephemeral and elusive. The ultimate conclusion is stark. All external phenomena are manifestations of the mind. They do not possess independent existence.
Wow. Well, we've certainly taken quite a journey through a profound challenge to our most basic assumptions about reality. We've looked at dismantling the idea of an independently existing self and the independent reality of the external world.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process, a genuine paradigm shift.
It absolutely is. It shakes the very foundations of our ordinary experience. But the texts emphasize this isn't just about intellectual demolition. This deep understanding leads somewhere transformative. It leads towards overcoming that fundamental duality.
The self-other split we keep coming back to.
Exactly. As one text puts it, when the idea of self and other dissolves, then the ideas of self-nature and its absence disappear by themselves. When that duality collapses, then all conditions determining existence in samsara start to disappear too. That includes karmic tendencies, disturbing emotions, mental defilements.
So seeing through the illusion of independence, both of self and phenomena, is presented as the ultimate release. The way out of the cycle of suffering, achieved by truly seeing things as they are, rather than just how our conditioned minds project them to be.
It's framed as a fundamental reorientation of consciousness, yeah. A path to genuine, lasting freedom by recognizing the illusory nature of these deeply, deeply ingrained projections.
That is the ultimate promise here.
Huh.
Recognizing the illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about you, our listener,
Yeah.
what does this all mean? If everything you perceive, including that intimate sense of you, is ultimately described as a manifestation conditioned by mind, lacking inherent independent existence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what then is truly real? And maybe more practically, how might this understanding, even just considering it, playing with this radical idea, letting it gently challenge your everyday perceptions, how might that begin to subtly shift your daily experience, your interactions, your relationship with the world around you? Definitely something profound to keep reflecting on.